This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Ingles. Shop online with Ingles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, everybody, Mike Griffith here, and welcome to tonight's Ingles on the Beat show. Really excited about the show that we've got ahead for you tonight. Peter Burns from the SEC Network is going to join us, and we're going to chop up post-spring football. He's going to give us his real take on Georgia football and tell you who the biggest competitor is, and it's not even close in Peter's mind. Also going to look ahead to the SEC baseball tournament. Peter's got some thoughts on Charlie Condon and Wes Johnson and what Georgia has done. We're going to take a real close look at those numbers. We're going to talk about the Bulldogs in just a few minutes, and then at the very end of the program, hot and cold, you're going to recognize some of the names that I'm going to throw at you. I'll just forewarn you. The people that have been hot stayed red hot. Let's talk Georgia baseball. 8 straight wins for Wes Johnson, the Bulldogs. I don't think anybody could have anticipated that they would go to South Carolina and sweep the Gamecocks. We knew that there was a chance they could do 2 or 3. They've been playing really well. But to sweep South Carolina and in the fashion they did it was no less than remarkable. Wes Johnson is turning into Coach of the Year material. If we're going to do this Coach of the Year thing where you vote on a guy that exceeds expectations. I mean, hey, that's what they did for Eli Drinkwitz, right? If you can hand it to Eli Drinkwitz in football, my goodness, you should certainly hand it to Wes Johnson in baseball. When you look at the expectations, which were very low, there were 28 new players on this baseball team. We're talking about 18 transfers and 10 freshmen. No less than remarkable. Really only 3 regulars coming back. And yet here we are. This is a team that's been confident from the beginning. Really like the way Coach Wes preaches focus and confidence. That's really big for him. It's the way he approaches things. And he told me, not everybody looks at unsuccessful at-bats the same way. Wes breaks it down into almost a positive. If you do everything right, it was a positive at-bat. You simply didn't get the result. And what he teaches his players in terms of handling the failure that's imminent with baseball, all baseball, because of the percentages, is that this is a tough game. And you just got to recognize that. And so maybe don't absorb the failures in baseball that they're destined to come. Everybody strikes out. Everybody grounds out. Everybody flies out. Everybody fails more times than they're successful at the plate. Don't absorb that as a negative. Focus on the process. Stay focused. Keyword focus. Stay positive. And we've seen unbelievable results. And yes, there's talent, no doubt about it. But there is no doubt that Wes Johnson is one heck of a baseball coach. His analytics, his scouting, and the mindset that he has built in these young men. Charlie Condon, amazing. 34 home runs. You talk to Charlie, and I've written a few stories about his poise, his demeanor, the confidence, right? You see Charlie take a strike, and he doesn't even blink. It's like, okay, maybe that was a strike, but it wasn't my pitch. Charlie knows when he gets his pitch, it's going out of the park. That's remarkable because it's not in the same place every time, and it's not the same speed every time. And for him to have the hand-eye coordination and reflex and bat control to be able to park that ball out into the Charlie Condon parking lot. And oh, by the way, if you've wondered why your insurance rates have gone up around Athens, your car insurance, Charlie has put some balls in windshields this year. I joke. I don't think that's affected the car insurance, but I wouldn't be parking outside the left field fence at Foley Field anytime soon during a Georgia baseball game. Remarkable. This week, the table is set. I can tell you these Georgia fans are drooling. And Georgia fans are usually a pretty chill, controlled, confident group. But you want to talk about drool and eagerness, they can't wait for Florida to get here. Cannot wait for Wes Johnson and Charlie Condon and this Georgia baseball team and Corey Collins to sink their teeth into Florida baseball. Now, I'll just tell you this. Florida gave Kentucky all they wanted, and you may not realize this, but Kentucky is the top team in the SEC, both records-wise and RPI. And Kentucky took 2 out of 3 from Florida in Gainesville, but it wasn't easy. This is going to be a hard-fought series this weekend. This is not going to be a pushover. A lot of people cannot wait. These games they're going to be standing room only. They're going to be sold out. I'm not saying you can't get a ticket, but if you haven't got one yet, you better start working on it or be ready on game day to pay a lot of money for it. Georgia, Florida, Foley Field, 6 p.m. on Thursday, 6 p.m. on Friday, 2 p.m. on Saturday. I like that they're getting these kids out of there on Saturday because they have to travel to the SEC baseball tournament next Tuesday in Hoover, Alabama. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Used to be we'd say, well, we don't really know how long Georgia. Now we're kind of like, you know what? We think we're going to see Georgia baseball in this SEC baseball tournament make a run. Now, I think that with Georgia having the number 3 RPI in the country, I believe the sweep over South Carolina, which elevated Georgia to number 5 in the SEC, they're 1 game up on Mississippi State. They need to stay in that 5 spot, I feel like, to be the slam dunk to host a super. I think they need to take 2 out of 3 against the Gators to guarantee it. Missouri plays Mississippi State this weekend. Mississippi State could sweep. So I think Georgia needs to take 2 out of 3 in this series to guarantee a super. I mean, Georgia has already secured a regional. They're going to host a regional for the first time since 2019. Bank on it. They got the number 3 RPI. There's a lot of data that suggests the 15 win is a marker in the SEC for hosting a regional, especially when the SEC is as good as it is this year. And how good is it? The top 4 teams in the RPI rankings are all SEC teams. So I feel like Georgia has secured the regional. Now they're getting greedy. Now Georgia wants to host a super regional. And if they can host a super, they can go to the World Series. I mean, I can't even believe those words came out of my mouth. But that's the kind of job that Wes Johnson has done. We've got a Georgia baseball team here that has made the College World Series a possibility. It's not a given. It's not an expectation. The pitching's not ideal, but it's coming around. It's getting better, and this team has a lot of momentum. So we'll pay close attention to this week against Florida, and then we're going to pay close attention to the SEC baseball tournament. Now, football. Let's talk some football. Ladd McConkey touchdown in Los Angeles. Jim Harbaugh had the mini camp and fireworks in the press conference. Ladd telling us his plane was delayed 3 hours in Atlanta. 3 hours in Atlanta. Finally got there, knocked it out of the park, had a great practice. Harbaugh loves him. They asked him, why did he trade up to get Ladd McConkey at 34? He said, love the speed. He plays that 4-3-8 every single play. You can see it in the way that he rages off the ball and once he has the ball in his hands. Thought that was a heck of a compliment from Jim Harbaugh. Crazy about Ladd McConkey. Loves him. Compared him to Brock Bowers. And Brock Bowers, by the way, did a pretty good job with the Las Vegas Raiders press conference. Came right out and said, look, I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to go out there and do my job and do everything to the best of my abilities and compete out there. And it's just that, look, that's Brock. That's just Brock. He's not going to say much, folks. He's not that guy. He just wants to play ball. And they asked, he was able to make such a great impact as a freshman. Really, he was kind of Todd Monken's Frankenstein. Give Monken a lot of credit for Bowers, right? And give Bowers a lot of credit for Monken's success too. But Brock says it was just my work ethic, just getting in there and learning the playbook as fast as I can makes a huge difference. To the point that Brock, and I think as a reporter, you really like the guys that you feel like are telling you how it is, right? That are pretty transparent, maybe even self, demeaning in some ways, they kind of pick on themselves. And Brock says, my mind was racing out there. I feel like I can't go as fast as I need to be going. Talking about Las Vegas. So the playbook is a big part of it. So he can play full speed. It's all new terminology, formations, play calls. I love that Brock was honest about that. I love that he said, hey man, I'm not where I want to be. And he had that sense of urgency in his voice. Like Brock Bowers wants to go out there and be Brock Bowers, but until he learns the Raiders playbook, he's not going to be able to be that guy. And the fact that he was willing to stand up there in front of a room of reporters and say, look, I'm not there yet. Just that built so much credibility. He probably doesn't even know, but I can tell you everybody in that room thought stand up guy. And even though Brock Bowers may not say much, he's going to be a guy they're going to go to and talk to again and again and again because he's a pro. He was a pro at Georgia. He's a pro with the Raiders. He and Ladd just did an outstanding job in their interviews. And I can't say enough about that. It's one of those things that when I think about the offseason and I think about the storylines, how the Georgia players do in the draft and where their draft is obviously big because of recruiting. But then I think about how these guys handle their interviews and represent. Because when fans look, they see Georgia football, and they're going to be ambassadors for the team forever. And I think that's important. And I know a lot of people that love Georgia football and bleed the red and black take a lot of pride in all these players and how they represent. And I think for the most part, Georgia players do a really good job. The Kirby guys really understand what it's all about. Kirby had a big week. He played in that golf tournament there in Birmingham. It's kind of it's a scramble. And, Kirby does a couple knockoff interviews. And I can tell you just from experience, just from talking with Kirby off the record, he doesn't really like to talk just to talk. It's just not what Kirby does. If there's a reason to talk, he's going to talk, right? If it's part of the responsibility, right? But events like this, they're going to ask him questions about his team, and he's going to be honest. I mean, he's going to do some knockoff interviews. He did the Greg McElroy show on WJX. I appear on JOX every week on Tuesdays at 11:40, by the way. Kirby did a bit spot on JOX in Birmingham. And he said that when you're talking about returning players, the priority is how do you build up the rest of the roster, right? Because he likes what he has coming back. But there's so much newness. And he told me that at the end of spring that it's almost like two teams, right? There's the experienced guys coming back, and then there's all the newness, right? So how do you build up that newness, and how do you retain them? We saw Christian Miller, overtures from Southern Cal. Big that Georgia kept him. How do you sell to a returning player that, look, you're going to be a second stringer this year, but you're 1 year closer to the draft and being a first stringer where you're going to build more draft value at Georgia versus going to another school as a one, and maybe you're going to play more this next year, but your exit speed, your exit momentum, your exit value coming out of school B, where you got to play as a sophomore instead of being a backup at Georgia, you're not going to have the same value. So that development piece is what Kirby and Georgia sell the most. And quite frankly, when you see the results in the NFL draft, or when you see the results on the NFL roster, a lot of more players are looking at that going, okay, maybe I don't need that pie in the sky NIL deal. Give me some, right? Give me some, make it competitive, Georgia. Maybe it's not the highest offer, but maybe it's enough to buy that car I want, or to help my parents with their finances, or whomever in my family, or start working on my future, or merely cash in on my value, the name, image, likeness value, which is now turned constitutional right. So a lot of chatter there, a lot of talk. It's been a great week for Georgia. It's been a fantastic offseason. I think there's momentum. I talk a lot about Carson Beck. I think he's getting a lot of hype. I think he's hearing it, and I think he's going to apply it. And I think that offseason is going to mean everything for the Georgia Bulldogs. And if Carson applies his leadership and pushes the players around him, there's no reason why Georgia can't win it all. But there's other teams out there. And we're going to take a short break here. When we come back, Peter Burns is going to give you some amazing insight that I think you're really going to enjoy. But first, let's recognize our amazing sponsor, Ingles. It's good! He could go all the way! Yeah!
At Ingles, we're proud to partner with area athletics, from Little League to the pros, college tournaments to high school heroes. It's all in the bag.
You ready? Hold on, let me check the score.
Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Well, welcome back to the program, and as promised, now joined by Peter Burns of the SEC Network, ESPN. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
What's up, buddy? How are you? It's an interesting time of year where we get post NFL draft, post spring football, post transfer portal, and then everybody kind of peeks in on all the other sports that are happening, which actually keeps us the busiest all year long. I mean, for SEC Network, by the time late March to about mid-June, we're swamped with basketball, men's and women's basketball, baseball, softball, golf, track and field. So it's our wild time right now.
Yeah, it's a great time for the SEC. SEC obviously dominant in a lot of these sports, so a lot of championships being won by these SEC schools. But I want to throw it back to the big engine, the engine that drives the revenue train, the front porch to the universities. Yeah, you've been good. People probably don't know this, but you've picked the correct national champion 2 out of the last 3 years simply by saying Georgia. Right. And last year you were wrong, Pete. You're wrong. But
listen, I feel I would have won 3 for 3 had Atlanta and maybe 1 or 2 possessions changed, in that game, because I still go back and still pissed off that I'm like, Georgia played so good all season long and didn't get that opportunity to play. Yet I'm sure it actually fires up Kirby to a certain extent because it gives them something to work towards and see if they can three-peat and start another one now.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, it's another year. It's 8 more guys have gone on to the NFL, a couple more guys out via the portal. But as we sit here in spring, I mean, is Georgia still the de facto pick 1 and 2? Your thoughts on Carson Beck and the Heisman Trophy?
Yeah, I mean, you look at where Carson is at right now. I think he's probably right at the odds-on favorite or pretty close to it, along with Quinn Ewers. And I think that's the 1-2 matchup that we're going to see. And it's odd that we're not going into a season talking about Alabama, but I think there's just so much uncertainty around that program. And is it, what Kalen DeBoer is going to bring in year one? How much did they lose? And especially in the wide receiver with Nye Black and Isaiah Bond both going to Texas, which we'll see in the conference, which is going to be crazy. But how much did Jalen Milroe grow? And those are the question marks I have for Alabama, which means to me that the top 2 teams to beat right now are going to be Georgia and they're going to be Texas. Mike, I was just down in Austin. I handled their spring football game, and it looks every bit like the way Georgia looked in 2021, in 2022, and 2023. I mean, they get off the bus. They're monstrous people. They're deep in every position. And now they got a quarterback in Quinn Ewers coming back, and they got a pretty damn good backup in Arch as well that wowed in the spring game. So, to me, that's where I look at it. I think the pecking order is Georgia, Texas, and then you have that kind of like secondary tier that's going to be full of Alabama, Ole Miss, and perhaps even Missouri at that point.
Interesting. You didn't mention LSU or Texas A&M. Of course, we've seen Brian Kelly do a pretty good job there, but recent comments about defensive line recruiting, and then Mike Elko at A&M, and we've seen that portal busy. I ask you first about Ole Miss and the number of transfers. I mean, when you've got more than 25 or 30 guys as transfers, Pete, I wonder how much does that affect the team chemistry, the buy-in? One, I don't know if we've really seen a transfer team really get it done yet. I've wondered. And then 2, just kind of your thoughts on those dark horse teams, LSU and A&M. Obviously, still a lot of talent in those places.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the Ole Miss thing first. And it's going to be a fascinating litmus test of how many transfers and quote-unquote mercenaries can you have on a team. And that's part of what Lane's game is right now. And that's part of what college football is. And so for me, do I think that they can compete for a national championship? Absolutely. I think they do, right? As long as you got Jackson Dart and a bunch of stud players around him, you're going to have a good opportunity. And they're able to kind of plug and play. But I think their litmus test is, all right, do we go all in while this window is here, right? Alabama's trying to find their footing with Kalen DeBoer. Georgia lost so much right now. LSU, you lose Jaden Daniels. So this is the time. And you're going to a 12-team playoff. So this is the time to put the pedal to the metal. On the flip side of it, you see Dabo down there. And I think there's only 4 teams that have not taken a transfer all season long in football. It was Clemson, Army, Navy, and Air Force, which is wild to me. So you see completely different sides of the spectrum. Now, so far, it hasn't worked out for Dabo and Clemson compared to how they were playing back in the mid-2010s. I don't think it works unless you have to go into the transfer portal. Listen, if it's going well and you got 30 guys that are transferring in, they're all in. But you better make sure you got the right 30 guys in. And so, if things all of a sudden go awry or some NIL payments don't go well or whatever happens, you want to make sure you don't have a disgruntled squad. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Lane can navigate that, but all eyes are going to be on Oxford to see.
You stumbled into a topic I wasn't sure I wanted to get into, but I think we've kind of opened that can of worms with NIL. Pete, you've seen a lot, and I know a lot of fans don't follow this closely. Look, we follow sports because we want to see these kids play. We don't want to read what's going on in the courtrooms, and yet we understand how important it is that this thing gets some guardrails and it gets unified in some universal fashion, so the playing field is level. The most recent thing is NIL deals, perhaps collectives, maybe all coming in-house, maybe some payments going back as far as 10 years. I mean, it's a lot of gob against the wall, but what's your takeaway on where we're at on the potential standardization of NIL and collectives?
I mean, I don't think we're anywhere closer than we were a couple of months ago, right? I mean, the idea of, all right, it coming in-house, which makes sense to a certain extent, because a school's going to be like, well, wait a minute, like, we do all this stuff in line with the university, but arguably one of the more important parts now is a name, image, and likeness collective of people who get together and help, and they're not going to be aligned with us, so why not? And I think that's what I think the leaders in college right now, they're trying to just streamline everything. Just saying, hey, we got way too much stuff happening, too much ancillary stuff happening. How can we kind of navigate it all together? And it's a mess. I mean, there's no way other things about it. And there's going to be some tough decisions for a lot of schools right now. I talked to Trev Alberts, the new athletic director over at Texas A&M, and he said, hey, I got a budget item now, a line item in my budget that's going to be an expense of about probably to $25 million. That's if they settle this lawsuit, and it's one of several that they'll have to navigate right now. So what happens? Do they stop spending money there? Right? Does Josh Brooks look at it and go, okay, he's $25 million, so we're not going to do more about the Georgia football program, or we're not going to do this and that, or do other sports suffer from it? Nobody knows right now. So in the meantime, I'm going to just, relax and enjoy what football I do have, because there's no answer. And, I talked to Commissioner Sankey. We were at a speech at an event last week, and Mike, I talked to him about it, and he brought up a very good point in the fact of, it seems like every time that they try to fix one solution, what happens is 3 more problems exist and 3 more lawsuits show up. So it's just this never-ending cycle right now of lawsuits that no one's getting around, and only the lawyers are pretty much getting rich.
Yeah, I'm going to have to work our way through that. One of the things that will probably be talked about at the SEC meetings in Destin, and I know you'll be there along with the SEC network, is the scheduling. 8 games versus 9 games. We know for the next 2 years it's an 8-game schedule, and we saw what happened last year. I mean, the SEC teams beat themselves up so bad, and a Big Ten team moved in and won the title. Can they go to 9? Are you in favor of 9, or do you think that this 8-game schedule works for you?
I mean, I just assumed. I thought. Again, after COVID, when we had the 10-game all-SEC schedule, I'm like, man, this is great. I never walk into the studio and I've got a North by Northwest Iowa Tech on the schedule, right? I mean, like, all of the games are really good. But then I also talked to all the coaches. They're like, bro, every single week it was just a meat grinder. And I don't think anybody wants that right now. I don't know why the SEC would change, okay? Because if it's worked this well as an 8-game schedule and allowing other teams to schedule, if you like Georgia, you want to go ahead and schedule Clemson like they did a couple of years. You want to have some really good out of conference games. Awesome, man. Go ahead and do it. Nobody's stopping you, but you get to decide as opposed to the conference. And so I look at it and go, you stay with 8 until there's a reason not to go with 8. Okay. In fact, everybody used to clown the SEC for having 8, and the Big Ten was like, oh, we do 9, blah, blah, blah. Well, a while back, they were looking at going, well, maybe the SEC has done it right. Maybe we should look at only having 8 conference games. Now, that changed when they needed more television money. So I don't think we'll go to 9 until all of a sudden their television partners, i.e. ESPN, says, okay, we're going to give you a boatload more money. And I think that they want to wait for a little bit longer for that to happen. I will say this. I think it's not out of the realm of possibility within 5, 6, 7 years, there may not be any non-conference games. We may go to a 12-game schedule, and it's only 12 games of the SEC. So this 8 versus 9 may be more of a 8, eventually get to 9 to get a little more money, and then ultimately just say, why are we playing outside SEC competition? That's like the NFL deciding that they're going to play the Arena Football League for a game. Let's not do it. Let's just play NFL versus NFL. And at some point, they might look at, hey, we're going to play SEC versus SEC going forward, and the winner ends up playing the Big Ten. I don't know if that's where it happens. I hope that's not the case, but I can see us heading down that road right now.
Certainly, there's going to be a lot of evolution of football in the next 4 or 5 years that could put the wheels in place for something like that. We talked about NIL collectives. I know they're looking at roster sizes, all sorts of different things, guaranteed players in post game that could occur before this happens. Pete, parting shot on college football before we move to baseball. Speaking of SEC meat grinders, top SEC newcomers through the portal, and I want to start in Georgia. I know you talk with our mutual friend Chris Doring a lot, and when I talked to CD in Atlanta, I mean, boy, there was a real look of pain on his face when I brought up Trevor Etienne. I mean, that really smarted, that really hurt. Now they got Jaden Rashada, and perhaps a backup this year, but maybe a quarterback of the future. I guess I would start though with Etienne. I kind of look at Trevor Etienne as perhaps the biggest addition in the SEC because I think Georgia will use him similar to how they use Brock Bowers all over the offense. Your thoughts on ETN and some of the other newcomers in the SEC that you see having an immediate impact?
Well, I mean, ETN probably is at the forefront of that list. And honestly, on the opposite side of it, I want to see what Brock is going to be able to do out in Lexington, right? I mean, like he knew that he wasn't going to get that opportunity with Carson Beck and him coming back. So that to me is going to be one of the more interesting storylines to see if how the former Georgia Bulldog is the QB1 coming up there into Lexington, because honestly, the Devin Leary situation didn't work out. And so how that's going to work out, I think is going to be interesting. I know when we talk newcomers, a lot of times in the last year or two, we're talking about transfer portal guys like ETN. But what about DJ Lagway, the five-star freshman over at Florida? I find that to be a really intriguing situation because I would imagine there was a pretty solid NIL deal cobbled together to get DJ Lagway to stay at Florida and be a Florida Gator. And if that's the case, Graham Mertz is the leader of that Florida Gator team. I mean, by all accounts, and when I talk to Chris Doring, I talk to people down there, Mertz is the damn man. And he's a leader. He's a good quarterback. But does he have that, like, top-tier level that DJ Lagway might potentially get to? So I'm kind of fascinated to see how that whole thing ultimately plays out. I will say this, though, Mike. Normally by May 13th, after we're kind of done with spring football, I feel like I got a pretty good pulse on the SEC, where everybody's at, what they need, what they don't need, what they're going to be. I don't know if I've ever felt more disenfranchised, maybe the wrong word, but disassociated and I just in the dark about this upcoming season than I ever have before. And I think a lot of that is due to the transfer portal. Like a lot of times I'll look at guys on rosters like, oh, I forgot that he transferred, and that kind of stinks because that's always what I really liked about college football is you got a guy that was going to be there for 2 or 3 years. You developed him. I mean, when Isaiah Bond, who could have been a legend in Iron Bowl history after making that, the 4th and 31 catch against Auburn, when he decides to make a business decision and go to Texas, I'm like, man, it's just a different sport. And I guess I got to stop being the old man on the lawn, like shaking my fists and just enjoy it.
Well, let's be honest. If A.D. Mitchell doesn't leave Georgia, I think we're probably talking about a third consecutive championship for the Bulldogs. Yep. But players like that do make a difference. Bond with the 4th down catch, debatable against Georgia in the SEC title game. So I think maybe part of the unpredictability also is it was kind of easy to break it down, right? Like, okay, we knew it was Georgia in the East, so we were halfway there. And then we had 2 or 3 teams in the West to sort out. And so therefore we were down to 4, and it was a 4-team playoff, and 1 and maybe 2 would get in. But now with 12 teams, you say to yourself, well, maybe DeBoer and Alabama, maybe they don't start out so great, but maybe by the end of the year, right? Or new
Missouri,
players, Ole Miss.
Missouri in the way that their schedule breaks out. Ole Miss and the kind of the quote unquote, the team that they have put together despite losing Quinshon Judkins over there to Ohio State. LSU, 2 10-win seasons in a row. And Garrett Nussmeier's not going to be horrible in that offense, but do they get better on defense? A Kentucky team. I mean, Tennessee with Nico Iamaleava, is he going to be the next, big time guy? So again, the fact that we sit here in mid-May and we think that there's probably 6 or 7 teams that could potentially be college football playoff teams versus in years past where you thought, there's probably 2, maybe 3. I mean, that's great. It's great for us. It's great for content. I guarantee it's going to be damn good for the television ratings as well.
There's probably 6 or 7 different ways to pronounce the Tennessee quarterback's name. And the fact that you nailed it on the first, this is why you're a pro, by the way. This is why Peter Burns is sitting behind the desk at ESPN and SEC Network, because I don't even know if I can spell it, looking at the chart.
It's like when Tua first came in, everybody's like, we're just going to call him Tua. I think everybody's going to call Nico, and just be like, and that's my favorite is watching, people call into our show for SEC This Morning, or people call into Feinbaum, and they're like, I want to talk about that Nico Mialevi, Laheva guy, Nico. That's, hey man, never quit. I enjoy it.
Kind of got to get it right. Now, speaking of getting it right, baseball. Looking at the RPI today, and there's rankings, and there's one final weekend left before we go to the SEC baseball tournament. Current RPI ratings index: Kentucky #1, Kentucky baseball, right there with thoroughbred racing, of course. Their basketball. I don't know where that came from, but there's Kentucky #1, and also tops in the SEC. Texas A&M #2. Georgia 3. Pete, nobody saw Georgia coming, right? I mean, what about what Wes Johnson and Charlie Condon have been able to do this year?
Well, and Corey Collins as well too, and the on-base percentage that he has been great. I think Wes is just kind of learning what his team was and who they are, and I think it's got to crush Wes, who is a pitching coach by trade and has done a good job with his team, to where it's like, hey, we're an offensive-minded team, and we're gonna need to pitch around enough just to do enough to keep us in contention and let the bats get hot. And I love how deep they are as far as their lineup. And we go back and look at it now. Teams are looking at it going, man, if there's an empty base, I can't put Charlie Condon up to bat. 34 home runs. The guy he's just a ball, he's a ball player. And I love the fact that, I can't remember the kid's last name, Logan Parker, or maybe I can't remember what his name was. But he comes in as a pinch hit and hits the grand slam. And Wes Johnson talks about it. He's like, hey man, I got 4 or 5 guys that are sitting on the bench that are great to play, and they don't get a chance because we're so deep right now. And that reminds me of LSU baseball last year, where you just had platoon players who just like, man, I can't break into this lineup, and they're really damn good players. So I'm excited. I mean, we've reached a point to where Condon and Collins have become as good of a 1-2 punch that we've seen in college baseball in a long, long time. And when Charlie gets up the bat, we look at him like, you got to watch, almost kind of like Barry Bonds did back in the day. And, when him and McGuire and Sosa and all those guys were every at bat you wanted to watch, that's what Condon is at the plate.
Yeah, Logan Jordan on the grand slam, as you were talking about just a second ago. But you're right. I mean, Charlie Condon, we don't typically talk about SEC baseball stars necessarily becoming icons unless they're at a baseball mad school like LSU, the New York Yankees. Brandon Larson, I was actually covering Alabama baseball when Brandon Larson hit 40 in 1997. Here's Charlie with 34, albeit after the BB core bats, which make the bats not quite as powerful, or the ball has the same exit speed, so it's actually tougher in some ways. What does it take? I mean, again, I'm local here in Georgia, so I don't really have the 10,000 foot view that you do sitting in the studio every week. But where is Charlie Condon at in terms of where he will stand in the annals of college baseball history?
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, he'll be looked at as a guy that we might look at it, like Wyatt Langford right now is playing incredible, in Major League Baseball, and how quickly he's come up. Look at Peter Alonso and what he's doing. Would it shock me if in 3 years from now we're talking about Charlie Condon in the home run derby in Major League Baseball? Not at all. Like, we'd be like, yeah, we saw that firsthand. And I think the way that he has, he can play 4 or 5 different positions. It's great. And also what I like about him as well too is how humble he is. I mean, you have an interview with him and he seems like he's a 10-year veteran right now. So it's good. You have to have, I mean, for Georgia, you've had, I can't remember if it was like Emerson Hancock and stuff, but you've had some good players before, but have you been able to kind of break through? And you have to have that one star to kind of take that next level. And everybody's like, all right, okay, I'll go down to Athens and see what it's about. And they're like, dude, this is great. My favorite thing about Charlie is, I think if I'm not mistaken, Wes Johnson was with LSU, or I can't remember where he was at, but didn't get an opportunity to recruit some players not too long ago. And it was Kirby Smart that helped bring some of these guys into the fold. So Kirby is recruiting for all sports down in Athens. And I love that about him.
Yeah, he's got quite a place in history. We've talked about that before. You've been so high on him, and yet, Pete, it just doesn't seem like it sticks. And I've made the point that he doesn't get this National Coach of the Year consideration because he's supposed to win. But will history take care of Kirby? I mean, is he firmly on that SEC Mount Rushmore of 4 coaches right now?
Yeah, I mean, you got 2 titles. I think that you're well within the reach right now of I wouldn't be surprised to see 5, and it wouldn't shock me if Kirby ends up making a run at Nick's record of national championships. Now, the thing is do you think that Kirby's going to stay in Georgia? Well, where the hell else would he go, right? There's not another college football program that he's going to go to. Would he go to the NFL? Yeah, but I don't know. Kirby just doesn't seem to be that guy that wants it to go and scratch that itch. I mean, nobody in all of sports has a better job right now. I'm telling you, well, maybe not all of sports, but it's pretty close, than Kirby. He's surrounded by guys he knew and guys he played with on some of his teams on his coaching staff. Never has to pay for a meal in the state of Georgia, is the highest paid coach. And now with Nick out of the way, the lane is clear for him to go on a storybook run, and I think he has that competitive juice. So as long as he doesn't get burnt out on name, image, and likeness and transfer portal and all that stuff, you tell me how many titles can he win in the next 15 years? I think he can win at least 3, if not more.
Yeah, and he's at the forefront of managing those things. I mean, I think that's part of what separates the coaches right now is who can handle the roster management in the NIL. Last take from you, Pete. You're going to be at the SEC baseball tournament. I don't really know how much the baseball tournament means in terms of seedings. I just know that when I cover it, I feel like I'm covering an event that not only is on par with Omaha, Nebraska, but actually probably is more competitive in some senses than Omaha, Nebraska because of the SEC's depth. What SEC baseball teams do you like in the tourney? And then if we're sitting around kicking the can as far as what SEC baseball teams you like to win the College World Series, who are some of the teams at the top of your list?
I mean, it starts with Tennessee, and I think a lot of people think of Tennessee a couple of years ago where they had the daddy hat and the cheetah jacket, and they still do that. And it's this brash team that's in your face, and they play with an attitude, but it's not the same kind of in your face. I think Tony Vitello knew, hey guys, like that was a little too much a couple of years ago, and he's dialed it back. Christian Moore, Blake Burke are fantastic. They don't have that pitching, but then again, nobody really has that pitching right now. Arkansas, Hagen Smith is great, but Brady Tigert's been kind of up and down. LSU doesn't necessarily have an ace. Hell, they may not even make it to postseason play. So, it's more of an offensive driven league this year than pretty much ever before. I like Tennessee. Arkansas is pretty solid because you at least have one ace right now. And Kentucky's kind of the wild card. Kentucky plays really loose. They're a team that everybody just has kind of I think they play with a chip on their shoulder because they were not heavily recruited as some of these other players. And they get up there and they joke around, they're chanting, they're giving everybody hell. Like, it's kind of just a fun team. And they take the persona of their coach, Nick Mingione. So again, man, it's going to be incredible to watch. And always it feels like a double-A all-star game coming out there in Hoover. And I'm glad they have it there, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, it's fun to watch you host the programming, Pete. You do a fantastic job, a rising star in the industry across the board. I really feel privileged to work with you, and thank you for the time you give us here on DawgNation, man. You do an incredible job.
Well, now I need some dogs to play good in the PGA Championship. I'm gonna be calling that. I leave tomorrow for that up in Louisville, Kentucky. So I get a brief reprieve from SEC works, but hopefully there's a couple of SEC names atop the leaderboard this week.
Well, we're going to be counting on you to plug them because our boss always wants to know why aren't more people talking about the Georgia golfers when they're killing it out there. So I'm gonna tell him we put it in Peter Burns' ear. He's gonna take care of it this weekend.
You got it. Thanks for the invite, Mike.
All right, we'll see you. Thanks again.
You
got it. Peter Burns, SEC Network and ESPN. And when we come back, I'm going to go through the hot and cold list. It's brought to you by Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing.
Your your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new Trane HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to care.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
Welcome back to the program. Mike Griffith here, and obviously Peter Burns on fire today. Talk about a guy that loves his job, passion, knowledge, really enjoy working with him, and a really balanced perspective. You know, sometimes when you have people on and they know they're in front of a Georgia audience, they're going to give you the extra Georgia. I mean, I can tell you, I've done enough of Peter's shows with Chris. He genuinely feels that strongly about Kirby Smart and the Georgia program. So interesting to hear what a guy from 10,000 feet that does SEC Network and ESPN says about the Georgia Bulldogs. Peter Burns is going to be around a long time, and I think he thinks Kirby Smart and Georgia will too. So let's start there with the hot list. And I'm going to say Georgia football. And you might say, what do you mean? Nothing happened last weekend. Well, what happened last weekend was Ladd McConkey did his rookie interview. Brock Bowers did his rookie interview. Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassiter, Tyke Smith. Folks, 6 Georgia players were drafted in the top 100 of the NFL draft. And you had better believe that all those recruits were watching. And that is everything as these recruiting weekends begin. As Kirby Smart puts the tentacles out, the feelers out, the talent comes in, these players are all paying attention to what Georgia's doing on the field on Saturdays, yes, but on the talent development as well. Again, Ladd McConkey, 3-star. Javon Bullard, 3-star. And yet they go on the top 100. And the way they represented, the way Ladd McConkey represented Georgia in his interview with the Chargers was no less than remarkable. You say, now that is what you want in an iconic figure in terms of how he represents his university, his education, and his community. Same with Brock Bowers. Brock's a man of few words, and yet he stood up there and sounded like a pro. I wondered how he would do. I wondered if he would stumble around or be nervous, and he wasn't. He was absolutely fearless in what he said about the Raiders' offense, about the attitude. They said, hey, are you going to bring some of that Georgia toughness here? He said, no, the culture's already here. I want to fit into it. I mean, the guy knows how to fit into a football team. He talked about having a sense of urgency to learn the playbook. So he doesn't feel like he's going as fast as he can right now. I thought that was a really honest answer. So I really enjoyed watching those guys interview. Javon Bullard, I thought he did an outstanding job. And then Tyke Smith, a guy that, again, this is an underdog I just kind of fell in love with during the postseason. When I looked back at the season and I saw what Tyke did, I realized, we didn't talk about Tyke enough at Georgia. With the interceptions and the forced fumbles and the tackles. We just kind of assumed he was the fifth wheel back there. But then when you looked at the stats, he was actually the leading tackler. And then you saw him at the combine. He wasn't supposed to run a 4.46. But you look at how he tested out among the best. This was a guy that was playing hurt early in his career at Georgia. That's what we were seeing. And he got better right in front of us. And I don't know that we really did a good enough job. We in the media did a good enough job of recognizing that and giving Tyke credit. Now he's with Coach Bowles down there at Tampa, another guy who just like Kirby Smart did at Georgia. Bowles played safety in the NFL for 8 years, and that's who's going to be teaching Tyke in a really good situation. Georgia football looking really hot as these players get started in the NFL. Baseball, of course. The Bulldogs go to South Carolina. They sweep the Gamecocks. This is a team they were neck and neck with for 6th place in the SEC. Now they've moved ahead of Mississippi State and South Carolina. They're the number 5 team in the standings. But as you heard me say to Peter Burns just a moment ago, number 3 in the country in RPI. Georgia plays host to Florida this week in a 3-game series at Foley Field. If Georgia takes 2 out of 3, I think they're a lock to be one of the top 8 seeds in the nation, which would mean if they got through the regionals, which I believe they will, they're going to host, they would host a super regional and play a best out of 3 for a chance to go to the College Baseball World Series. Georgia has not advanced past regional play since 2008 when they went to the national championship game in the Omaha World Series. So Georgia baseball on a roll right now. Charlie Connon, I broke out the story the other night, 34 home runs. That's a modern era record. Now, right around 2011, there's something called the BB Core era where they changed the bats so that the exit speed off the bat wasn't quite as strong or as fast. So the records before 2011 are kind of viewed differently than the ones now. Even so, LSU's Brandon Larson hit 40 in 1997. Charlie's at 34. He might break that record straight up. Just a remarkable performance by the Bulldogs down the stretch. Of course, they're hot. Don't really want to go with cold this week because I thought the Georgia softball team flexed some muscle. Anytime you go 14 innings and beat the host team at a tournament, which is what they did against Auburn, that's a big win. That's legit. It's a rivalry win. It's a pride win. Yes, they got eliminated the next day by 2 days later. The next day was rained out by the eventual SEC tournament champion Florida Gators. Florida really good. Looks like a World Series team. Not going to count Georgia softball out yet. They're going to host a regional this week. And if they win that, likely that they'll play UCLA. UCLA is hosting a regional also. This is a veteran team with enough veteran players, Jada Kearney, Sydney Kuma, Madison Kerpix, Lily Backus on the mound, Sarah Mosley. They have so many players that have been around for so long, Lindy Ray Davis. They can go on the road and beat UCLA. They beat UCLA earlier this year in a tournament in Florida, but this is a veteran team, and this is kind of a Georgia thing. They get hot late. Tony Baldwin is probably the preeminent hitting coach in the country. So keep an eye on Georgia softball that will be on television, obviously Georgia baseball, 3-game series this week. There'll be more interviews with the NFL Dawgs as they go. We all kind of try to get Kirby where we can. Kirby's had some interesting comments, nothing crazy about the transfer of Rashada. Obviously they wanted the 4th scholarship quarterback. I like this. I call this a boomer bust move. Like, why wouldn't you reach, if you're going to add someone through the portal, as a 4th quarterback, why not pick a guy with a ginormously high ceiling? Now, I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know how it's going to shuffle out with Gunnar Stockton and Rashada as they work to compete behind Carson Beck or Ryan Puglisi, the incoming freshman. I don't know how it works, but I know that when you put this many dynamic players in one room, everybody gets better. Everybody competes. Everybody works within the system, within the constraints of team first. Mike Bobo knows how to run a quarterback room, folks. And so this is a good thing. It's going to make Georgia better. I like the upside. Loved Gunnar Stockton's attitude about this. When I asked him about this near the end of the season, he said, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to be. Quarterbacks want to be here. You should have to compete at Georgia. So the right attitudes and the right leadership is in place. Kirby Smart has built a culture that makes additions like this possible. So we will stay tuned to that. I hope you guys stay tuned to DawgNation all week long. Don't forget, every day at 10 a.m., it's Brandon Adams and DawgNation Daily. You're going to want to catch that show. Most of you already see it. If you haven't seen it yet, make sure you tune in. It is must-see viewing for Georgia football fans. Wednesday night before the hedges, Jeff Santel is our recruiting expert. Jeff doesn't just know it. He goes there. He talks to these people. He brings you video. He brings you special guests. I think we had Nate Frazier on recently, incoming freshman. Only Jeff can bring people like that onto the tube, whether it's YouTube or our Facebook channel where you're watching it, maybe our homepage. And then Thursday night, Kaylee Manziel and Connor Riley, really entertaining program, a lot of fun topics. Maybe some topics that make you squirm a little bit, maybe some questions a little too controversial, but then some other questions that'll make you laugh and have fun. And that's really what Thursday night DawgNation is all about. So I hope you get an opportunity to watch that program as well. I want to thank Kaylee. She's also the producer for the show tonight. Thank you, Kaylee, for the production. I want to thank all my friends at DawgNation, you and the audience as well. Hit me up on Twitter at Mike Griffith 32. Any other comments? Put them in the comments at the bottom of the page. I will go back and review and see the good, the bad, and the ugly.